Hey, Hershey Free Church, this is George Davis. And today I want to introduce you to a friend of mine, Dr. Peter Williams, who's a biblical research scholar who also serves as principal or president of Tyndale House, which is a research library in Cambridge, England. And the reason I wanted to particularly introduce you to Peter now is the fact that we're going through this series on the life of Jesus. And as we go through this series, it's pretty natural if at some point you have questions like, well, I know these are the stories of Jesus, but can we really trust the gospel writers? And so if you wrestled at all with some of those questions, Peter has written a really helpful resource. It's this book entitled, Can We Trust the Gospel? So I wanted just to have a brief conversation with Peter and talk about some of the themes and issues that he raises in this book. First of all, Peter, thanks for joining us from England, and
great to be with you.
Welcome, at least remotely, to Hershey, Pennsylvania. So let's just dive right in. So first of all, just briefly explain why you wrote the book in the first place.
Yeah, well, I thought about writing it for 20 years. I've wanted to write this particular book and mulled over it for a long time. And a key thing about it is it's a brief book.
Right.
And another key thing is that it doesn't use technical language beyond what it needs to, but it also explains what evidence there is in a simple way for Jesus and the Gospels. And it gives you chapter and verse, not just from the Bible, but also if I refer to a particular manuscript, I tell you what museum or library you can find it in, what its call number is. And so I want to make the evidence really directly available to people. And I want it to be a book that can be given out to inquiring friends. So I have written it with people who don't have a biblical background in mind, but I think it will still advance the knowledge of people who do. So you can do both easily. And the case sort of runs through from nothing to the cumulative case for Jesus. So that's the way I've tried to structure. It takes 4 hours on audiobook. So 20 years thinking about writing something that just lasts 4 hours.
Well, they've definitely condensed a lot of helpful material into this book. Now, in talking about why we can trust the Gospels, one of the things you talk a little bit about is the idea that when we come to the Gospels, there's evidence that we have eyewitness testimony. So just give us a few examples of what that entails.
Yeah. So for instance, I've been to Pennsylvania, but I've not been to Hershey. And if I were to try and write a story about Hershey, I just wouldn't have a clue. I would get everything wrong. And I'm living in an age where there's the internet and you can look all sorts of things up. But if I were trying just to research on the internet, I'd get all sorts of stuff wrong anyway. Now imagine you're doing that in the ancient world and you haven't actually been to the land that you're writing about, and you're writing about this guy, Jesus. You're not going to be able to get things right. You're not going to be able to say where the land goes up and down and get the journeying times right between one place and another, even get the names of the towns right. And the gospel writers are getting those sort of things consistently right and getting the culture right. They're getting even what the most common names in the area were right. So, I don't know what people generally who have been in Hershey for a long time are called, but I'm pretty sure there would be a different set of names there on the whole from what you get in California and other things like that. And so it's getting those sort of things right that the Gospels get, and that's just astounding. And they're getting the weather rights, the coinage right, the taxation rights. You can just go on. And so it's when you get all of those sort of things right, you say, okay, this person has to be really close to the events, or they've done an absolute ton of really careful research, talking to someone who's really close to the event. So those are your two basic options.
I think one of the questions that comes to mind when we think about the life of Jesus and the accounts of Jesus is, can we really trust that the gospel writers have accurately reported Jesus's words? How do you process that? So
I think it's great that we've got 4 gospels, and that's as many accounts as we have really of the most famous man at the time, namely the emperor Tiberius. But also the way they form relationships with one another. 3 of them, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are closer to each other than John. And that actually gives you ideal relationships to have with four gospels, because Matthew and Luke have some things that aren't in Mark, and then all three of them share some things, and there are things that are only in Matthew and only in Luke. And so you end up with about 6 sorts of types of material. And so whatever way order you think the gospels were written in, you're able to show the same sort of patterns coming up in each. And that's a really striking thing, because that means none of those gospel writers can be the people who've invented that particular element. And so that's one of the ways you can look at that. The same sort of storytelling technique comes up in different gospels. The emphasis on parables, the way Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, and actually parables, a particular thing from the land of Israel that's quite striking. The coinage talked about. Jesus' parable in Luke 16 about the unjust manager, it's got all sorts of dry measures that are only used in Palestine. It's got phrases there. So I think there's just lots of information in the language. When you get down in details, you say, yeah, that looked like it really comes close to the time and place. And these stories aren't made up by committees. You don't get brilliant stories like the parable of the prodigal son through a committee. I mean, it just doesn't happen.
Right.
It needs to go back to Jesus. But I'm actually writing a whole book about just that right now.
Okay, well, we look forward to it. One of the arguments you make is that you mentioned the kind of the relationship between the Gospels, but one of the arguments you make is that if you look carefully, I think there are evidence of what you call undesigned coincidences. So yeah. unpack that term for me.
Yeah, so it's when you get 2 very small details in different Gospels that just agree in quite a striking way, but it's too subtle to think that one gospel writer has put the detail in to prop up the other one. So you get this with the feeding of the 5,000, where Mark tells you lots of people are coming and going, and that's why Jesus goes aside to a remote place. But he doesn't tell you why many people are coming and going. But John tells you it's Passover time, which is the biggest commute of the year. It's like Thanksgiving. Everyone's traveling at that time. So that would explain it. Or in John's account of the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus turns to Philip and says, where should we get bread from? And then he replies, and Andrew replies. And it also tells in John, those guys come from Bethsaida. It's over Luke's gospel, it tells you the feeding took place near Bethsaida. Now, if you're just reading John, you see no significance to why he talks to this particular disciple. But if you plug in the information from Luke, you suddenly realize he's talking to a guy with local knowledge. Or you get the bit where in John's gospel, Jesus says at the Garden of Gethsemane, when disciples are trying to stop him getting arrested, shall I not drink the cup that's been given me? But of course, it's in the other gospels that he's just been praying to the Father, let this cup pass from me. So you've got that word cup just occurring in the different gospels round about the same time, like within moments of each other, and yet for different sayings. In other words, it's explained by, okay, Jesus was thinking about a cup, the cup of suffering, the cup of God's anger, from Jeremiah. That makes sense. Or the way Mary and Martha are portrayed in Luke and in John. So they're 2 different stories. It's in Luke, you've got the story about where Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet and Martha's all busy serving. And it's in John, you've got the story of their brother Lazarus having died and being raised from the dead. And again, it's Mary sitting down and Martha whizzing round. So it's 2 different stories, but it's the same characters. And those sort of just agreements that you get in true narrative, that's a striking thing that happens in the Gospels.
Well, obviously, these are some, I think, very powerful arguments, particularly cumulatively. But I think for some, there's the question of, okay, I get what you're saying, but I get stuck on the whole issue of miracles. I mean, in our modern world, how can we trust gospel accounts that include reference to miracles?
Yeah, so I think again, what I'd say is you can show the trustworthiness of the Gospels in all the things that you would normally think of trustworthy as signs of trustworthiness if there weren't any miracles. And I don't think there's any reason to treat them differently because of the miracles. But part of the thing is people have a problem with the idea of a miracle because they think science creates these beautiful patterns, describe simplicity in the universe, and miracles are like random things that happen, and pixies and fairies and unpredictable things. Why should we go for that? It's the paranormal. And we've got to remember, Christians, when they're talking about miracles, are not talking about the paranormal that is spoiling the pattern of science. We're actually talking about things that make a pattern. So we'd say Jesus makes patterns. He's the ordering principle of the universe. That's what I say. The opening of John's gospel could be said to say, he's the word communicating from God. So we believe that miracles form a signal pattern. They are actually a message. They're called signs in John's gospel. So they're not random, oh, God decides, let's break some laws now, make some laws and then break them. No, they're actually all forming a message pointing around Jesus, pointing to God. They're not just random things. And so that actually means that they form their own pattern. And so we're not saying, oh, give up on the beautiful pattern of science and accept something messier. We're saying, no, Jesus is the most beautiful pattern there is. Everything ordering around him makes sense. The Old Testament preparing for him, his death and resurrection making sense of the universe. That's the pattern. And you've got to look at it as a whole. If you try and bolt one miracle like the resurrection onto an atheist universe, it will never look probable enough. You can stack up all the witnesses or whatever, and everyone will say, well, nah, it doesn't quite do it. Because given the assumptions of atheism, then miracles are infinitely improbable. And you can even get people to say to you that they wouldn't believe a miracle that they saw with their own eyes if they're a hard enough atheist. They say seeing is believing, but actually, no, I would just think I was being tricked because they're so convinced. So I think, yes, Christians want to go with the evidence, but the evidence points to Jesus.
Okay. Well, what would you, undoubtedly people watching here kind of are at all sorts of places in terms of thinking about the Gospels and Jesus. So what would you say to someone who would, in essence, acknowledge, I'm skeptical or uncertain about Jesus and Christianity, but I really am open to learning more?
Well, I'd say firstly, the Gospels, the four Gospels, take less than 9 hours to read. So I think David Suchet is just under 9 hours when he reads the New International Version out loud on audio. So just read them and then badger someone like you or anyone else in the church for any questions you have about them, and don't take no for an answer. And I'd say, read the whole of the Bible. Again, do it in company with other people, but that is by far the best thing to do. And I think you'll see that the Gospels really are unlike anything else in terms of just what they pack in, and the person of Jesus is just remarkable. And there's no one quite like that.
Well, good. Well, one final question, if I can circle back to how we started. I mentioned that you are the president of Tyndale House, which is a research library in Cambridge, England. So tell us a little bit more just about your work at Tyndale House.
Yeah, so we have a lovely property with 7 or so buildings just on the doorstep of Cambridge University. And people come from around the world to live in Tyndale House and research in our library, which is meant to have all of the books that you might possibly want for academic research of the Bible. What you're seeing behind me is actually my collection of books, but Tyndale House is just far larger, and actually it's a great meeting place for people, and it's where we try and shape people. And what I'd say is that because we don't give out degrees, we're not like a university or anything like that. We're actually serving people, whether they're doing a degree in Africa or in North America or wherever. People can come and study there. And also we're looking to raise up scholars to serve the world and serve the global church. That is, there aren't enough people who are balanced and careful scholars who are humble and brave to speak the truth. So there's just a really urgent need to have people working at that level. And we're talking about people, most people in our library can read 6 or more languages. That's just normal. They've invested, they're investing 10,000 hours or more in something. We're talking about, just as you'd have with a very skilled surgeon, we're talking about that sort of level. And from that, well, someone might become pastor of your church in Hershey and be able then to bring all that knowledge. And they might be a Bible translator in Mongolia or Italy or anything. So I think there's just a really big need for people who are able to work at that higher level in the church. There's no danger of oversupplying.
Well, that's right. Well, I was never one of those readers at Tyndale House that knew 6 languages. So I lowered the curve when I was there. Peter, again, thanks for your time this morning. And also thank you for helping us work through some of those questions that we wrestle with when we seek to take the gospel seriously, seek to take Jesus seriously. And again, the book is entitled, Can We Trust the Gospels? Peter Williams, published by Crossway. Thanks again, Peter.
Thank you.